Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here in Washington, D.C., where we're covering the Center for a New American Security's annual security conference. This one focused on strategic competition, on maintaining the edge, and we're honored to be talking to the president of CNAS, Richard Fontaine. Richard, action-packed day, fascinating insights. Started off with an amazing conversation between Lindsey Graham and Elizabeth Warren, two folks you don't normally associate with being on the same stage, certainly talking about security. Talk to us a little bit from your standpoint, having absorbed the day. What were the key takeaways from this year's conference?
Well, the strategic competition question, in particularly in respect to great power competition, is real, and everybody's thinking about the measure of the difference between us and Russia and on China economically, militarily, technologically, everything else. But one of the other things that came out during the day is while we were trying to think about that, there's all these other things going on. The Middle East continuing to melt down here and there in Libya and Syria, the Iranians doing their bit, the North Koreans, of course, doing what they're doing, and the possibility of trade wars. And so while the administration and many people in town would like, I think, to prioritize strategic competition with the other great powers, we also have to deal with all these other issues that are going on. It's not easy.
So we got to walk and chew gum at the same time, as Lyndon Johnson would say.
Exactly, but it's like walk and chew several packs of gum at the same time. I mean, when the breadth of issues and the degree of uncertainty is pretty high, and so even talking when we had everything ranging from very senior people to working level people are thinking about or working on these issues, the amount of stuff on their plate is really great, and it's now crossing economics and technology and military and everything else.
As somebody who has been watching this space and working in it your entire life, there is a concern that some of the president's actions in particular, even though he has tremendous people who are on his team, may be actually counter to where the United States needs to be, particularly at this highly delicate time when you have both Russia and China being very malign in their actions. As Tori Newland, your new CEO, kind of pointed out that, China now is adopting the Russia playbook. She said that in front of Congress yesterday in testimony. Talk to us a little bit about that dynamic and how, it doesn't matter whether the United States has a really good national security strategy or a great national defense strategy. Announced Bridge Colby, one of the chief architects of the national defense strategy, and certainly a big voice in the national security strategy, is over on your team, which was a tremendous get for you guys. How is the president disrupting what is a very, very important strategic time? And do you think that it negates some of the great work that other folks are doing, whether it's Jim Mattis or a national security strategy is doing?
Well, part of the problem is, I don't know if it's an inability or an unwillingness to set clear priorities. Now, the national security strategy, and especially the national defense strategy, did set priorities. But for example, the national defense strategy, the priority was clearly great power competition. And the administration, I think, has been very right to call out China on some of its technology and economic practices. It has discriminatory investment rules. It forces technology transfer. It steals intellectual property. It has all kinds of barriers to investment and trade from foreign countries in its economy. So one alternative to accepting that state of affairs would be to work with, say, the G7 countries and the combined market share and economic power to provide a united front and try to push China on these things. We didn't do that. The G7 meeting was about going after our closest economic and military allies and going after the Canadians and putting tariffs on products that they make. And you can't do everything at the same time. So you have to prioritize. If China and Russia are going to be the number one priority, we need to enlist our allies and our partners in the effort to compete against them.
And how possible is that? At a time when the environment looks like it's decaying, right? I mean, we're looking at sanctions, tariffs, counter-tariffs. We're not yet sanctioning our allies, but it's getting pretty close in terms of the temperature, even with Canada, as you mentioned. How possible is it to do this, and does it give Russia or even the Chinese an opportunity to sort of get in there and say, hey, look, you're really mad at the guy in the White House. How about we strike a deal and we can put some of our differences aside?
Well, there's a couple challenges. One, in Asia, as countries try to decide how much cooperation, how much competition are they willing to engage in with China, they're looking to see how close their relationships are with the United States and with each other. And the dicier the relationship looks with the United States, the more questions they have about our staying power, the more likely they're going to be to hedge in the direction of China. So that's one. I don't think there's a lot of European countries, or I don't think Russia is going to provide a strategic alternative to Canada. But by splitting, putting wedges between the United States and Canada, the United States and Germany, the United States and other countries, it makes it that much harder to stand up to Russia when it's doing things. One of the great strengths of the United States is our alliance system and our partners. China has a grand total of one ally in North Korea, maybe Cambodia if you want to throw them that. And we've got them all over the world. And that is a strategic advantage we should be using and not undermining.
Let me ask you a question about your outreach mission. I mean, obviously every think tank is to shape the policy process, but you guys also at CNAS have been working very hard to try to take the story to the American people. I know American Security Project also does something in cooperation with the European Union, but you guys have been working to try to take that message to the Hill, but also take it to the American people. On both of those fronts, what progress do you see as you go out on these outreach tours and you're talking to folks all around the country about the importance of international institutions which are under siege? I mean, there are a lot of Americans who are like, oh, WTO is terrible, globalization is awful, I have a cousin who lost their job, or they themselves may have been displaced because of economic change. So it's not like that, some of those feelings aren't real, even if the focus of the ire may be misplaced. Talk to us about those tours and those efforts you have at outreach, and how you gauge whether or not you're making progress, whether it's when you visit Des Moines or whether you go to meet with the Dakota delegation, to make the case on why having these robust institutions really matters and is important for American security.
Yeah, so we have visited 4 cities thus far in this project that we're calling, across the pond in the heartland, in the field sort of activities. And so we've been to Pittsburgh, Tampa, Florida, to Salt Lake City, and I just got back from Grand Rapids, Michigan. And of course, you see differences in all of these different places. But what I have been surprised by is the level of interest in trying to understand some of these issues. Are we really going to war with North Korea or not? Should we be worried, or do we not need to be? What does it mean if we're in Syria or not? Why are we in Afghanistan after 17 years? This trade stuff is sort of hard to understand. Is it good to put tariffs on steel and aluminum or not? These are some questions about contemporary U.S. foreign policy, and big decisions are being made. We've been meeting with mayors and editorial boards of local news and regional newspapers, with World Affairs Councils and chambers of commerce and local business leaders, and doing public events, both in the city, which tends to be blue, and in the suburbs, it tends to be red in a lot of these places. One of the benefits, though, is to inform our thinking. I mean, I think one of the wake-up calls for the 2016 election for a lot of people in Washington, and we're not an exception to this, was, people outside the Beltway get a vote in the shape of our national security policy. And if we do not have some sense for what they are thinking, what their priorities are, what their fears are, what they hope their opportunities are, then we are missing the boat and we're delinquent to some degree, and when we're trying to shape what the country should do.
Richard Fontaine, President of the Center for New American Security, the conclusion of a spectacular conference on strategic competition. Richard, thanks very much. It's always a pleasure, and look forward to covering next year's conference already.
All right. We'll see you there.